Ngozi walked the same road every day after work, carrying the smell of freshly baked bread on her clothes. The market street was always full of noise, vendors shouting, children running, and cars honking. But no matter how busy the world seemed, her eyes always found the man who sat quietly near the market gate. He looked tired, his clothes were torn, and his hair was messy with dust. Some people crossed the street to avoid him, others threw harsh words or ignored his presence completely. But Ngozi was different. Every evening she stopped for a moment. Sometimes she greeted him with a warm smile, other times she handed him a small loaf of bread wrapped in paper. "Good evening," she would say gently. And every time, the man would lift his head and smile back with tired eyes. "Thank you," he always said in a quiet voice. His name was Chaik, though no one cared to ask. To everyone else he was just the homeless man, the one who sat near the gate like part of the street itself. But to Ngozi he was more than that. There was something about the way he spoke, something soft and calm. It was as if he carried secrets he never wanted to share. One rainy evening, Ngozi came running with her shawl pulled over her head. She saw Chaik sitting in the same place, the rain pouring down around him. His thin shirt clung to his skin and his small bag looked soaked. Without a second thought, she ran to the nearby shop and bought an umbrella. When she handed it to him, Chaik's eyes widened. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "I want to," Ngozi replied with a gentle smile. "No one should sit in the rain." He hesitated, then took the umbrella carefully as if it were made of gold. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he whispered, "Thank you, Ngozi." She blinked in surprise. "You know my name?" "You wear it on your apron," he said softly, smiling for the first time in days. From that day something changed between them. She didn't just see a stranger anymore. When she passed by they began to talk. Small talks at first, about the weather, the market, or the noisy children who ran around. Chaik listened more than he spoke, and whenever he did, his words carried a calm strength. One afternoon a group of boys began to tease him, throwing pebbles and shouting cruel words. Ngozi rushed over and scolded them. "Stop it. Leave him alone," she shouted. The boys laughed and ran away, but Chaik only lowered his head. "You shouldn't waste your anger on them," he said softly. "They shouldn't treat you that way," she replied. Chaik gave a faint smile. "People fear what they don't understand." After that day Ngozi began bringing him small meals wrapped neatly in paper, bread, rice, or sometimes just fruit. She never asked about his past and he never offered it. But as time passed, she noticed small things about him that didn't fit the life of a homeless man. His words were too thoughtful, his voice too polite, and sometimes, when he looked at the tall buildings across the street, there was a sadness in his eyes that seemed deeper than hunger. Sometimes she wondered who he really was, but she never asked. She only knew that when she spoke to him, she felt peace. He listened in a way few people ever did. One evening, as the sun turned the sky orange, Ngozi handed him a piece of bread and sat beside him for the first time. People passing by stared, whispering to each other. But she didn't care. For the first time she wanted to see the world from where he sat. "You must think I'm strange," she said with a small laugh. Chaik shook his head. "No, you're kind. That is rare." The words warmed her heart. "Everyone needs kindness," she replied softly. The days went by, and Ngozi started looking forward to her small talks with Chaik more than anything. Sometimes she caught herself thinking about him at night, wondering where he slept or if he had eaten. She wished she could do more, but all she had were her words, her bread, and her heart. One night she came to the market late. The shops were closing and the street was quiet. She didn't see him at first and felt a wave of worry. But then she spotted him near the gate, sitting peacefully under the umbrella she had given him weeks before. The sight made her smile. "Still awake?" she teased. Chaik looked up and smiled faintly. "Waiting for my friend." She laughed softly. "And who might that be?" He looked at her kindly. "You, of course." Her heart skipped a beat. For a moment she didn't know what to say. No one had ever called her that in such a simple, honest way. That night as she walked home her heart felt light. She didn't know who Chaik really was or what had brought him to live on the street. But she knew one thing for sure. She wanted to keep seeing him, keep talking to him, and keep sharing her kindness. Little did she know, her kindness was touching a man whose life was far greater than anyone around her could imagine. But for now he was just Chaik, the quiet man near the gate, and she was the only one who truly saw him. And though the city around them kept moving, fast, loud, and careless, there in that small corner of Lagos, a gentle friendship was growing, one act of kindness at a time. The days moved slowly in Lagos, but for Ngozi they had begun to carry a quiet joy. Every evening after work, when the sun dipped low and painted the sky with gold, she walked toward the market gate with a small bundle in her hands. Inside were pieces of bread, sometimes sweet buns or leftover pastries from the bakery. She always saved the freshest ones for Chaik. He was always there, sitting on his wooden crate near the rusty fence. His clothes were still worn and his hair was still rough, but there was something peaceful about him. When he saw Ngozi coming, his eyes softened, and his face lit up with a gentle smile. He would greet her quietly, "Good evening, Ngozi," and she would sit near him for a few minutes before heading home. Their small talks became longer each day. At first they spoke about simple things, the weather, the noise of the market, or how quickly the bread sold that morning. But slowly their talks grew deeper. Ngozi began to tell him about her dreams, her fears, and the little things that made her heart ache or smile. She told him about her mother who had passed away when she was young, leaving her to grow up with her aunt. She told him about the bakery where she worked, how she mixed dough in the early mornings and how the smell of warm bread made her feel alive. "One day," she said, her eyes shining softly, "I want to have my own bakery. A small one, maybe just a single room. I'll call it Sweet Blessings. People will come for my bread not because they are hungry, but because they'll feel love in it." Chaik listened carefully, nodding as she spoke. "That's a beautiful dream," he said in his calm voice. "And I believe you will make it happen." She laughed gently. "You sound so sure." "I am," he replied. "You have a heart that does not give up. People with such hearts always find their way." Those words stayed with her for many nights. She had never been praised like that before. Most people only saw her as a poor bakery worker who should be grateful for what she had. But Chaik, this man with nothing, spoke to her as if she could be someone great. In return, she shared her kindness with him in the only way she could. Sometimes she brought him tea in a flask. Sometimes she gave him a blanket when the nights grew cold. She never pitied him. She simply cared, quietly, without expecting anything back. And Chaik, though he said little about himself, began to open up in small ways. He told her he used to travel a lot, that he had once worked in a company before life took an unexpected turn. He never explained what happened and she never pressed for details. All she knew was that behind his calm eyes, there was pain, and perhaps secrets too deep to tell. One evening, as the sky turned dark with clouds, Chaik looked at her and asked softly, "Ngozi, why are you kind to me when others are not?" She looked at him for a long moment. The question made her heart ache. Around them, people hurried past, pretending not to see. To them, Chaik was invisible, someone unworthy of attention. But to Ngozi he was human, gentle, wise, and deserving of kindness. She smiled gently and said, "Because everyone deserves kindness. We all have days when life pushes us down. But that doesn't mean we stop being people. One day your life will change, Chaik. I believe that." He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her with quiet surprise. No one had ever said such words to him before. His throat tightened slightly as he tried to reply. "You think so?" he whispered. "Yes," she said softly. "Sometimes life hides blessings in strange places. Maybe yours is waiting for you too." Her words touched something deep inside him, something he had long buried beneath loneliness and silence. For years he had lived behind walls, watching people pass by, feeling unseen. But Ngozi's kindness was like sunlight breaking through those walls. She didn't know it, but she was helping him remember who he truly was. That night, after she left, Chaik sat quietly, holding the piece of bread she had given him. The street around him was noisy as usual, but his heart felt strangely peaceful. He thought about the life he had left behind, the boardrooms, the cars, the endless meetings. He had walked away from it all to find something real, something honest. And now, sitting on the cold street, he realized he had found it, in her kindness. Meanwhile, Ngozi walked home through the narrow lanes of her neighborhood, smiling to herself. The world felt lighter somehow. Helping Chaik made her feel alive, like her small kindness could make a difference. She didn't know who he was or what had brought him to the streets, but she felt connected to him in a way she couldn't explain. Some nights, she imagined what he might look like if life had treated him differently. She could picture him in clean clothes, maybe working somewhere, maybe laughing more. The thought made her smile, though she quickly brushed it away, thinking it was foolish. Still, she couldn't deny that he had become an important part of her days. Her friends at the bakery sometimes teased her. "Ngozi, why do you waste food on that man?" one of them said. "He's just another beggar." But Ngozi always replied gently, "He's not wasting it. He's eating. And he says thank you." The others would laugh and shake their heads, but she didn't care. She believed in doing good quietly. As the weeks passed, Chaik began helping her in small ways. When she carried heavy bags from the market, he offered to hold them. When she looked tired, he encouraged her. He even started carving small wooden figures from broken pieces he found, tiny gifts he gave her shyly. "They're not perfect," he said once, handing her a small wooden heart. Ngozi smiled and held it close. "They're beautiful," she replied. Each day they grew closer, not through grand gestures but through small acts of care and understanding. They laughed, shared stories, and built a friendship that neither of them expected. What Ngozi didn't know was that Chaik often disappeared late at night, walking far from the market to make secret phone calls. The man who seemed poor and broken was living two lives, one of simplicity and another filled with quiet mystery. But for now, in those precious evenings, he allowed himself to be just Chaik, the man who sat by the gate, sharing bread and laughter with the one person who saw him as human. And in that simple kindness, something beautiful began to grow between them, something neither could name but both could feel deeply in their hearts. The sun rose over Lagos like any other day, but something felt strange. Ngozi walked her usual path to the market, her heart lighter as she carried a basket of warm bread. She expected to see Chaik sitting in his usual spot by the gate, smiling gently as she approached. But when she reached the corner, the place was empty. The wooden crate he always sat on was gone. The space looked lonely, like a story that had suddenly lost its last line. She stood there for a while, confused. Maybe he had gone to find food somewhere else, she thought. Maybe he was sick. The day went by, then another and then another. But Chaik never returned. At first she tried to convince herself it was nothing. But as days turned into a week, worry began to eat at her heart. Every evening she looked toward the gate, hoping to see his calm face again. But the street was now just noise and dust. Without him, her evenings felt empty, like something precious had been quietly taken from her life. Her friends noticed her silence. "Ngozi," one of them said as they baked bread together, "why are you so quiet these days?" She smiled faintly and said, "I'm just thinking." They didn't understand and she didn't explain. How could she? How could she tell them she missed a man the world saw as nothing? A man who had become her friend, her listener, her quiet comfort. Weeks passed. Then one morning when the air was still cool and the bakery smelled of fresh dough, a sleek black car stopped outside. Two men stepped out, dressed in dark suits and polished shoes that reflected the light. Their presence drew attention immediately. People turned to stare. Ngozi froze at the counter. The men walked toward her calmly. One of them smiled politely and said, "Miss Ngozi?" She nodded, confused. He handed her a white envelope with golden edges. "You are invited to attend a private business event tonight at the Grand Horizon Hotel," he said. "Mr. Chaik Nwosu personally requested your presence." Her hands trembled slightly as she took the envelope. The name, Chaik Nwosu, echoed in her mind. She stared at the men, but before she could ask anything, they bowed slightly and returned to the car. The vehicle drove away, leaving behind the scent of rich leather and expensive perfume. Her heart raced. Chaik Nwosu? Could it be the same Chaik she knew? Or was it a mistake? The thought seemed impossible. The man she had met by the market gate couldn't be someone powerful. He had worn torn clothes, carried no phone, and lived with the street dust on his skin. But deep inside, something told her there was more to the story. That evening she stood outside the hotel gates, holding the invitation tightly. The building towered above her, shining with lights and laughter. Expensive cars lined the entrance. Men and women in fine clothes walked past her, greeting each other with confidence. She felt out of place in her simple dress and worn shoes, but she gathered her courage and stepped inside. The lobby was like a dream, marble floors, golden lights, and music that floated softly through the air. A woman at the reception smiled and led her to the main hall. Ngozi's hands were sweating as she entered the room. She had never been anywhere so grand in her life. Inside, businessmen and women filled the hall, talking and clapping. At the center was a stage with bright lights. A tall man stood there, speaking to the audience with a voice that carried strength and calmness. At first, Ngozi couldn't see his face clearly. But as he turned, her heart nearly stopped. It was him. It was Chaik. Gone were the torn clothes and dusty shoes. He wore a fine suit, his hair neatly styled, his face clean and confident. His posture was strong, his voice smooth and steady. Behind him was a banner that read, "The Future of Hope Foundation, Empowering Lives Through Change." Ngozi's eyes widened. The people around her clapped as the host introduced him. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and CEO of Nwosu Holdings, one of the largest companies in Nigeria, Mr. Chaik Nwosu." The room erupted in applause, but Ngozi stood frozen, unable to move. The name on the invitation finally made sense. The quiet man who had sat by the market gate was not a homeless stranger. He was a billionaire, living a life completely hidden from what she had known. She watched in silence as Chaik spoke about helping the poor, about building opportunities for those forgotten by society. His words were sincere, filled with passion. "I wanted to understand real struggle," he said. "Not from behind office walls, but from the streets where people fight every day to survive." Ngozi felt her heart beating fast. Every word felt heavier than the one before. She remembered the nights she had brought him bread, the times he had smiled shyly, the way he had listened when no one else cared. All those moments came rushing back, and now they painted a story she never expected. When the event ended, Chaik stepped down from the stage, surrounded by reporters and businessmen. Cameras flashed, people greeted him, hands reached out to shake his. But as his eyes scanned the crowd, he suddenly stopped. For a brief second, his gaze found her. Time seemed to freeze. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Chaik's confident smile softened. There was recognition in his eyes, something warm, something real. He took a step forward, but then he was pulled aside by another guest. Ngozi's heart ached as she turned to leave. She felt small in that grand hall, lost between the glittering people and their shining clothes. But deep down she wasn't angry. She just didn't understand why he had hidden the truth. Outside, the night air was cool. She stood by the gate, holding her small purse tightly. The city lights reflected in her eyes as questions filled her mind. Who was the real Chaik? Why had he chosen to live on the streets? Had she meant anything to him at all? As she began to walk home, a soft voice called from behind, "Ngozi, wait." She turned quickly, and there he was. No cameras, no crowd, just Chaik running after her in the dark. "Please," he said, slightly out of breath. "Don't go yet." She looked at him, her voice trembling. "So it was you. You were never homeless." Chaik's face showed a mix of guilt and emotion. "It's not what it looks like," he said quietly. "Let me explain." But she didn't know what to feel. Relief? Anger? Betrayal? The man she thought she knew had disappeared, and in his place stood someone she barely recognized. The night breeze moved softly between them. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Chaik lowered his eyes and said, "You'll know the truth soon. Please just trust me one last time." Ngozi said nothing. She turned away slowly, her heart heavy but curious. As she walked into the night, she didn't realize that her kindness had already changed a billionaire's heart forever, and that this was only the beginning of a story she never saw coming. The soft lights of the hotel ballroom were beginning to fade as the guests slowly left, their laughter echoing in the hallways. Ngozi stood quietly near the exit, still unable to believe what she had seen. The man she had shared bread with, the man she had pitied for having nothing, was now surrounded by men in suits, shaking hands and giving interviews. She wanted to leave, but her legs would not move. Everything around her felt unreal, like a dream she could not wake up from. As she turned toward the door, a familiar voice called her name. "Ngozi." She froze. Slowly she turned around. There stood Chaik, not the homeless man she once knew, but not the billionaire on stage either. His suit was still elegant, but his eyes were the same, calm, kind, and full of warmth. He smiled softly as he walked toward her. For a moment neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy with emotion. Finally Ngozi whispered, "You lied to me." Her voice trembled, filled with hurt and confusion. "All this time you pretended to be poor. You made me feel sorry for you. Why would you do that?" Chaik stopped a few steps away from her. He looked down for a moment, then met her eyes again. "Ngozi," he said gently, "I was not testing you. I never meant to deceive you." She folded her arms, trying to hide the tears forming in her eyes. "Then why? Why live on the street? Why let everyone believe you were nothing?" He took a deep breath. "Because I wanted to understand what life really means for those who have nothing," he explained. "I was planning to start a foundation to help the poor, but how could I help them if I never truly knew their pain? So I left everything behind for a while, my house, my money, my comfort, and lived like them. I wanted to see the world through their eyes." He paused, his voice softening. "But during that time I found something more important than business or charity." Ngozi's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Chaik smiled gently. "I found you." Her heart skipped a beat. She wanted to speak, but the words refused to come. He stepped closer, his voice calm and sincere. "When I sat by that market gate, everyone looked at me like I was invisible. They walked past, some even threw insults. But you stopped. You smiled. You gave me bread when you barely had enough for yourself. You talked to me as if I mattered. You saw a man, not a beggar. That changed me." Ngozi's lips parted slightly. Her eyes glistened as she looked at him, still struggling to process his words. Chike continued, "Do you know how rare that is? To find someone whose heart is pure, who gives without expecting anything back. You showed me what true kindness looks like. You reminded me that wealth isn't about cars, money, or gold, it's about love, about compassion." A tear finally rolled down Ngozi's cheek. She quickly turned away embarrassed. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "All I did was share bread." Chike reached out slowly and wiped her tear away with his thumb. His touch was gentle. "That small act was bigger than you think," he said softly. "You gave me something no amount of money could buy, faith in humanity." She looked at him, her heart trembling with emotions she could not name. The man standing before her was no longer just the poor stranger she had once pitied. He was someone deeper, someone who had lived both sides of life and still chosen kindness. They stood there in silence for a while. The soft hum of music played in the distance, and the golden lights from the chandeliers reflected in their eyes. Finally Ngozi asked in a quiet voice, "So, everything you said back then, all those talks about dreams and hope, were they true?" Chike smiled, his eyes shining. "Every word," he said. "I meant every single one. And I still do." She felt her chest tighten. It was as if the walls she had built around her heart began to melt away. He stepped closer, his tone gentle but firm. "Ngozi, I didn't come here tonight just to thank you. I came to tell you that you changed my life. When I looked at you, I didn't see pity, I saw strength, honesty, and courage. You reminded me what I had forgotten, that success means nothing if it doesn't touch lives." Ngozi lowered her gaze. Her cheeks were wet now and her hands trembled slightly. "I never thought I'd be important to someone like you," she murmured. Chike chuckled softly. "You were important long before you knew me," he said. "It just took me losing everything to understand what really matters." The ballroom was almost empty now. The workers began clearing tables, and the echoes of laughter faded into quiet. But in that moment, it felt like the whole world had stopped around them. Chike looked into her eyes once more. "You once told me that everyone deserves kindness," he said, his voice tender. "You were right. But I also learned something else. Everyone deserves to be loved for who they are, not what they have." Ngozi's lips trembled as she whispered, "And what about you? What do you deserve?" He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I only deserve what my heart chooses, and it chose you." The words hung in the air between them. Ngozi's breath caught. She wanted to speak, but her voice was lost. All she could do was look at him, the man who had once sat in rags by the road, now standing tall before her, not as a billionaire, not as a stranger, but as someone whose heart she had unknowingly healed. For a long time they stood there in silence, the night warm and full of quiet magic. At last Chike said softly, "You showed me what real wealth means, Ngozi. It's not money or fame. It's love, kindness, and the courage to care when no one else does." And for the first time that night, Ngozi smiled through her tears. In that smile, Chike saw the truth he had been searching for all along. That even in a world of riches and power, the purest treasure could be found in the heart of a simple, kind woman who gave a stranger bread, and changed his life forever. The morning sun rose softly over the city of Lagos, spreading a warm golden light across the busy streets. The smell of fresh bread drifted through the air, leading people to a small but beautiful bakery at the corner of a lively market. The sign above the door read, "Ngozi's Oven of Hope." Inside, the sound of laughter mixed with the clinking of trays and the hum of happy customers. Behind the counter stood Ngozi, her hands dusted with flour, her smile brighter than ever. She moved with confidence now, greeting each customer with warmth and care. Her dream had finally come true. It had all started a few months after the big event at the hotel. Chike had visited her again, not as the mysterious CEO surrounded by guards and assistants, but as the same kind man she had once known on the street. He came with a plan, not just to thank her but to help her build a future. "I remember you once said you wanted to open your own bakery," Chike had told her. "Let's make it happen." At first, Ngozi hesitated. She didn't want his money or his pity. But Chike smiled and said, "It's not charity. It's a partnership. You believed in me when I had nothing, now it's my turn to believe in you." And he kept his promise. He helped her find a small shop space, bought new baking equipment, and even hired workers from poor families who needed jobs. He wanted Ngozi's bakery to be more than just a business. It was to be a place of kindness and second chances, just like the one she had given him. The day the bakery opened, the whole market came alive. People crowded the street, curious about the new shop. The smell of soft bread, meat pies, and sweet cakes filled the air. Children laughed as they ran inside, and adults whispered stories about the woman who had once shared bread with a homeless man, only to learn he was a billionaire. Chaik stood quietly at the back watching her with pride. He didn't make speeches or draw attention to himself. He simply looked at her, the woman who had changed his life without even trying. Weeks turned into months and the bakery became one of the most loved spots in the city. Every morning people lined up outside before the doors even opened. But what made the place special wasn't just the bread, it was the feeling. Ngozi treated everyone with the same kindness she had shown Chaik that first day. She offered discounts to the poor, gave free bread to children, and always smiled at those who looked tired or lonely. She often said, "A small kindness can feed the soul as much as food feeds the body." And Chaik, though still busy with his company, visited often. He would roll up his sleeves, help with deliveries, or simply sit by the window with a cup of tea watching Ngozi work. Whenever someone asked why the powerful CEO spent so much time in a small bakery, he would smile and say, "Because this is where I found the richest thing in the world." Their friendship slowly deepened into something more, something quiet and real. They spent evenings talking on the bakery's rooftop, watching the sunset paint the sky. Chaik shared stories of his travels and business, while Ngozi talked about her dreams for the future. One evening, as the city lights began to flicker, Chaik looked at her and said softly, "You once told me that everyone deserves kindness. But I think you forgot one thing, you deserve happiness too." Ngozi smiled shyly, her heart full. "And I have it," she said. "I have peace, purpose, and you." He reached for her hand, and in that simple moment, no grand words were needed. Their hearts understood what their lips did not say. As time passed, their story spread far and wide. Newspapers wrote about them, calling it the love story that taught Lagos to believe in kindness. People were touched by how a woman's compassion had changed a billionaire's life, and how that same compassion built a future for many others. But to Ngozi and Chaik, it wasn't about fame. It was about gratitude and love. They never forgot the beginning, the dusty street, the torn clothes, the shared bread. Those memories became the foundation of their life together. One day Chaik brought her a small box. When she opened it, she found a gold pendant shaped like a loaf of bread. Inside it were engraved the words, "Real wealth is found in the heart." Ngozi laughed through her tears. "You never forget, do you?" she said softly. "Never," Chaik replied. "Because that day when you gave me bread you gave me hope. And I'll spend the rest of my life giving it back." Years later, Ngozi's oven of hope had grown into a chain of bakeries across Nigeria. Each one followed her rule: serve with love, help those in need, and never forget where you came from. Children from poor homes were given scholarships through the bakery's fund. Old women were hired as bakers and helpers. Every loaf sold carried a story of hope. And every morning when the sun rose and the ovens began to glow, Ngozi and Chaik still started their day the same way, side by side, sharing a cup of tea, smiling at the life they had built together. They had found more than success. They had found meaning. People often said that their love story was like something out of a fairy tale, but those who truly knew them understood the truth. It wasn't magic or luck. It was kindness, faith, and the courage to see a person's heart instead of their appearance. And so, in a busy city where people often rushed past one another, the story of Ngozi and Chaik lived on as a gentle reminder. Sometimes the poorest-looking soul carries the richest heart. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness changes everything. And sometimes, love finds you not in luxury or wealth, but in a simple loaf of bread shared with a stranger who turns out to be your destiny.